Hey everyone, and welcome to Virtual LAD. So this is a bit of a different experience for me to be recording my presentation ahead of time, but as the LAD program committee pointed out, doing things in this format does give us the opportunity to do things that we couldn't normally do with an in-person presentation. So I've enlisted the help of my talented daughter Chloe to help me edit this, and so you will get the Lustre Community Release Director's Cut. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge that this is the 10th anniversary of the first LAD. We've been getting together on an annual basis since 2011, but in 2014 we did meet in Reims. So I went back through my phone to sort of dig out some old pictures of the past events. I thought it'd be fun to have a little montage. I mostly discovered that I take a lot of pictures of food and buildings, and not so many of people, unfortunately, but I did manage to salvage a few. The only record I had that was of 2011 is at the top right here, the very battered Lustre Salle de Pot shirt, which was handed out at that event, and that was a very relatively small event compared to sort of recent events, only maybe 30 people in a smallish room. But since then it's definitely been a well-attended and very interesting event. So I have 2013 there on the top left. That's I believe Aurélien back when he was at CEA presenting. There's a few photos here from the 2014 event in Reims. Myself in the middle there, in the catacombs where they keep the champagne bottles. In the bottom left, Andreas presenting, and then in the middle, Shinji Sumamoto from Fujitsu taking the camera. At the back of his head, it looks like Stefan is being presented with something there, Stefan Thiel, who organized that event when he was back at CEA. Then I have a picture here of Mike Pershin presenting at LAD in 2016. And finally, last but not least, in the bottom right, there's Oleg presenting at last year's LAD 2019. So I'm talking to you today in my capacity as the lead of one of the leads of the OpenSFS Lustre Working Group. So this is a forum where we get together to talk about any matters relating to the Lustre community releases. And the thing I most want to stress here is that we are involved in putting together and analyzing the results of the annual Lustre Community Survey. So there's the link there where you can sort of browse over the more detailed results and see past results. But I mostly just wanted to stress to anyone that, this is, to be aware that this is a thing. Please encourage you to participate when you see the calls going out on the mailing lists every spring. And please don't worry, there is no spam that goes out as a result, no mailing lists. You can just do it anonymously, and just even partially completed surveys do help us just to get an idea of trends. So the data's, this was taken back in March now, so the data is getting a bit old, but moving on now to the next slide. You can see here, I think this was the most interesting development from the last survey myself. Looking at Lustre versions. So on this, you can see this is going back over the last few years, and you can see the trends generally. For most releases, you see a downward trend year on year as people upgrade or sites go out of service. But the two ring sites here for Lustre 210 and 212, so that's our former LTS branch and our current LTS branch. And you could see the red bar in the middle is from 2019, and so when we did the survey at the beginning of 2019, Lustre 212 had only just been out for a matter of some weeks, and there was fairly low adoption. But over the course of the year, we've had very strong growth in that. And while 210 is still the most commonly used production release from the survey respondents, you can see that it has, seems to have peaked and dropped slightly. And my strong expectation is for the 2021 survey that we will see, 212 be the clear leader in terms of amounts of sites in production. We're moving on again. Sticking with the LTS theme still. So we've had Lustre 2.12.5 went GA back in June, and that had added support for a number of different Linux distros and new MoFed versions. And now we are just finalizing a Lustre 2.12.6 release, which will be coming out in the coming weeks. And that will be 2.12.6. There will be a few bug fixes that could be interesting, and also it will have the ability to build with MoFed 5.1. And so the question that I always get asked when I talk about LTS releases is, what the next LTS release will be. So I think we're still sort of at the point where we're just getting strong adoption of 2.12, and there have been some initial interest from some parties to sort of move to a newer release, perhaps 2.14 when it's out, or 2.15, but I still think it's sort of fairly early in the conversation. So do encourage you to participate in that discussion. If you've got views, I'd be really interested to hear them. Definitely, as we did last time, things will be signaled well ahead of time before we switch, and there will be some overlap transition to allow you to give you adequate time to sort of plan around things. Moving on again, a lot of significant milestones coming up at the moment. So as well as 10 years of LAD, we have 10 years of OpenSFS and 10 years of community development going on. So back when the Lustre engineering team were at CFS and Sun and Oracle, it was pretty rare to have any contributions from outside of that group of engineers, maybe the odd rare time. And the reason was because people had to sign a contribution agreement signing away the copyright to everything they did. So part of, the shift that happened as the team sort of departed from Oracle was we moved to a kernel-style contribution model, which means the copyright is shared. So this has really greatly increased the diversity of people who are contributing to the project, and the number of organizations involved has grown. And I think it's basically made, this model has meant that people are reassured that changes are not going to impact their ability to continue to use Lustre for their purposes. So over the 10 years, if you look back in the Lustre 1.8 release that came out in 2009, there wasn't a single external contribution, just one organization all the engineers work from. So this is this graph here at the top, the organizations, and you can see that there's been, even though over the years through 2.13, which came out at the tail end of last year, even though we've seen consolidation of some organizations, and some organizations have switched priorities and maybe are not active anymore, we've still seen a steady growth in terms of the number of organizations who are contributing. And if you look, there has some variation from release to release. Obviously some releases take longer than others, and there's some other factors that might affect the exact number of developers that have their changes land, but the overall, you can sort of see a general upward trend in the number of developers over time, which I think is very encouraging. And then the graphic at the bottom is to do with lines of code and number of commits, which are two sort of metrics we look at as the rate of change. And you can see there's largely sort of some correlation between the releases. So moving on again, we've got a bit more on this topic. So over the 10 years, so 45 distinct organizations have had contributions, over 200 individual developers. And so the thing that's interesting here as well is many of the developers over this time, because of acquisitions or people moving jobs, have actually worked for multiple organizations over that period. So I did put together, as part of this 10 years thing, some stats about looking at the individual engineers across, their own individual contributions, irrespective of whom they were employed by at different times. And you could see that these are the top 10 that came out from by the time I got the data from Dustin back in June. And of those, it was only James Simmons who, did get recently recognized by OpenSFS for his, stellar contributions over the decade. He is the only one who's worked for just one organization over that time, in both lists. And the other person I will call out is Neil Brown of SUSE, who works with James closely on the upstream kernel development. And, he features in the list of the top 10 list in terms of the number of commits, but not the lines of code changed. Just the nature of the sorts of changes he's doing have been a factor. But, anyway, everyone else who came into those lists was working for multiple organizations. But again, reinforcing that, despite people moving or things shifting between organizations, and because, many of those moves are more to do with the organizational change in priorities, Luster's continued to be able to evolve and grow, despite whatever's going on in any individual organization. Lustre 2.14 is the major release we're working on at the moment, so it should be out late this, before the end of the year. We're looking at, the most notable changes on the server side. The primary servers will be, RHEL 8 based, and just to be clear, when I say RHEL, I mean Red Hat or Red Hat derivatives like CentOS or Scientific Linux, and then also supporting other newer kernels on the clients as well. And so it is different. We do support MoFed 5.1 will be the default release we're doing all our testing with on this, whereas on the LTS releases we do focus on MoFed 4.9, which is boasted as more of a stability release. With release testing, this is something we're always looking to raise the bar on and make sure that we're producing software that's going to work effectively at this sort of scale, and that people want to use it and to deal with all different kinds of workloads. So we're always looking at where we need to add new functional tests, like we've been doing in the security area. Also LNet, we've added a new functional regress test, and even developed a whole new test framework that's specialized in how we attest LNet changes. And also noteworthy, the IO500, we're now, historically we'd always use MD tests and IOR just to sort of check that our performance was consistent release on release, at least the same, if not better. And now we've switched to using IO500, which gives a much fuller picture across a range of different workloads for that purpose. So this picture here shows our gatekeeper Oleg on the beach, and he was, as usual, still trying to keep up with the Lustre landings, and found that that it was so windy, the sand was sort of affecting his ability to do that. So his mother-in-law helpfully covered him so he could complete what he was working on. But so Oleg takes his duties very seriously. If those of you who were at LAD last year probably remember well his presentation, which is very engaging. And if you want to see the slides of it, I've got the link here below. But basically, yes, everything that before it goes through very stringent extra tests, static code analysis, all kinds of running with debug kernels and such like, really looking to see if there's any regressions whatsoever creeping in. So this is the latest roadmap on lustre.org, basically just showing the timings of releases. So Andreas is going to talk a bit more about some of the new features coming, so I won't really dwell on this, but just to sort of show the timings that we expect 2.14 to be out at the end of this year, and then 2.15 about Q3 next year, and so on. So just to recap, so the LTS model has been well adopted. 2.12 is really getting the focus for most production deployments nowadays. 2.12.6 will be out soon. 2.14's in final release testing. And anyone who's interested in the Lustre working group or contributing to Lustre in general, please reach out. We're really happy to talk to you. And that's it. Just to sort of pause and see if anyone has any questions.